Infrastructure impact. So looking at permafrost geochemistry along the Inuviatuk Highway. I'm going to skip through the abstract, and the people, except for note that the hunters and trappers and ARI up in Inuvik are really helpful, and they've done lots and lots of good things for this project. Background, a little background. Climate change, warming, permafrost degradation is going to ensue, and the way you see that is on the right here with increasing stream flow in pretty much most of the Arctic rivers. Also with permafrost, you're going to get groundwater flow will become more dominant. That has implications for solutes that were formerly sequestered in frozen ground. When they are released, transported to surface via groundwater, there's lots of things that could go on, but we haven't got a lot of data on. So that's sort of the sort of background of why we thought about this. And if you want to sort of get into a simplistic system, this is sort of active layer during when it freezes to the bottom, and this is potentially what you're going to see in the future, where the active layer doesn't freeze to the bottom and you have unfrozen water in winter. We don't really know how to deal with that because we've really not set up the tools and the methodology to investigate it properly. Some of the things we really need are seasonal data. These kind of processes are unique to these environments. We don't really get them in the south here, so we can't really use our southern knowledge to do that. But to do that, we need long-term monitoring data for modeling and forecasting. I mean, it's absolutely critical for understanding these kind of process changes will impact, needs that monitoring data. But that's scant and difficult to obtain, especially in winter when everything freezes. One of the things that's really the first step is hydrogeological monitoring. What is happening in the active layer during freezing? What is happening when it thaws? How does the seasonal cycle actually go about in terms of geochemistry? So we've chosen a research site. I'm just going to go through this quickly because we did this last year. This is the borrow pit that was dug for road material for the Inuviatuk Highway. The highway was completed in 2017, though this borrow pit was finished in 2016. Pretty much all the borrow pits along that highway are actively degrading with rapid permafrost thaw. One of the good things they did was they started monitoring the chemistry of the waters around the pits and the road before, during, and after the actual construction of the highway. And what they found in this pit in particular was that the surface water is down here, nice, fairly clean water that you get in the freshet when the spring runoff is happening. But then a large chunk of the water export is actually this really high solute, high sulfate. There's the sulfate Canadian guideline for aquatic health guideline, sorry. There's the uranium. We're way above those values. 3,500 microsiemens per centimeter is pretty saline water. So there's obviously something going on here, and this wasn't the only place they noted this, but this is where we decided to go and investigate. If you actually go into the pit and you see these aligned depressions along the length of the actual flow path within the pit, the depressions are formed by thaw, subsidence thaw. Permafrost has melted below these pits, and they've basically subsided. That they're in a line that defines a flow channel is essentially because this is the groundwater flow path, and it's advective heat that's actually doing the damage here. And so surface flow really isn't a particularly big deal in this thing. It's groundwater that we're really interested in. The geology, just briefly, is the pit was dug for these gravelly clayey gravels. Yet for the most part, the pit is actually clayey silt. It's a classic till, and it has these lenticular, pebbly, silty gravels throughout it, and those gravels form complexly interconnected aquifers within the active layer, and that's what defines the drainage pattern. The aquifer geometry is really difficult to know, and I've spent a lot of time last fall trying to figure it out and didn't get too far. This is a question that I think screams at us that we need some geophysics to help us. So the hydro, this is the fall, this is what it looked like in the fall, fully nicely snow covered. We installed a whole bunch of screened groundwater wells and sensor wells. So the active layer is 0.4 to 1.8 meter thick. Its greatest thickness is where those gravels and the associated water is present. The gravel lenses do not seem to be interconnected, or we didn't even find them outside of the drainage networks. So as we said, we installed the screened wells, installed the pressure and water parameter sensors. Just a bit on what we were trying to do with the sensors. Traditional soil, pore water and formation pressure sensors would not withstand the volumetric expansion of freezing water. They would fail. In unconsolidated materials, methods that you could counteract that aren't going to really work very well. So one of the sort of goals of this project is to develop robust monitoring systems that you can do these hydrogeological investigations and monitoring sensors with. Because it's standard, it's something that needs to happen. If you were in southern Canada here without permafrost, you would be using these sensors all the time. So we went with these sensors, but these are filled with glycol, so they're not going to die when due to volumetric expansion, and they're made by a company in Vancouver called RST. So that's going to actively, these are pressure sensors, so we're going to actually monitor the water pressure and the formation pressure during freeze up and thaw. The other sensor we went with was these soil sensors, which can give us quite a bit of information on what the actual pore waters are doing within the soils during freeze up and thaw. So that was a monitoring approach. So we have the pressure cells. This is a formation pressure for the most part. This is a water pressure sensor, and this is electrical conductivity and permittivity, which is essentially water content and temperature sensor. So let's have a look at what those sensors gave us. So here's two, basically, they're not far apart. They're only about 10 meters apart. So one on the left is installed at 0.9 meters deep in a gravel aquifer, and the one on the right was installed at 0.8 meters deep in a mud aquitard, just actually just to the side of the aquifer. One of the first things you notice is that it stops. Well, that's because the data logger died on March 1st, unfortunately. Fortunately, when we went up there in a week and a half ago, it was just the batteries that had died, and the data logger actually survived. We just needed to replace the batteries. So that was good, but it was unfortunate because it limited our time series. The other thing that's really interesting is that these two are not that different in terms of depth. But if you actually look at the one on the right, it froze, the ground froze to 0.8 meters deep by mid-January. Whereas on the left, you were only just freezing the ground at the beginning of March, some 6 weeks later. There's really only one, advective heat is really the only way that you could keep it unfrozen, given that they were 10 meters apart. So this is a clear indication you're getting groundwater movement during freeze up. There's also brine formation. The electrical conductivity goes to extreme levels, 4,000 microsiemens or 4 millisiemens per centimeter. And then at the very end there, as it starts to die, that's where the ground is starting to freeze. And so it's starting to get, the sensor's not working properly. Permittivity, again, also dies at the same time as the ground starts to freeze. And you've got all these little bumps and wiggles and things like that. And I think that's pretty much going to be indicative of groundwater flow. So that, in fact, there's quite a lot of information from here that even during freeze up, that there's groundwater is flowing, and probably through pressure regimes due to the actual freeze up expansion. So let's look at the pressure regimes. So here's piezometer is in red and the formation pressure is in blue. And so one of the things we found that the first week or so of sensor information is very noisy because the sensors get installed and then they have to actually, there's a relaxation time and an equilibration time. But then you actually see in the piezometer, the pore pressures actually increase quite dramatically. And whereas the formation temperatures, which is essentially the water plus all the solids as well, sort of stay the same until it starts to, and the formation pressure, as it freezes up, then the formation pressure actually releases, suggesting that the expansion is actually causing deformation, probably causing deformation at the surface to do that. But what's interesting is you're seeing both pressure increases and decreases over the winter. There's lots of wiggles again, and particularly in the pore water sensor, it's again indicating there's quite a lot of water movement going on over the winter. So in summary, it's a hydrogeologically complex system. There's no two ways about it. Minor to moderate gravel lenses that are complexly interlinked. How groundwater flow actually goes between these lenses is something I think we still need to really resolve, and geophysics is probably the way to do that. But there's no doubt that there's advective heat flow along these gravel aquifers is causing rapid subsidence and is generating quite a lot of changes within the pit. Overall, the monitoring sensors worked well, except for that 1 meter where the data logger batteries died. Again, for the most part, the batteries did really well for such, because it was a very cold winter up there. There's no doubt you're getting a brine formation. You're freezing out the fresh water, leaving a saline brine as the remnant, and that's almost certainly your source of elevated solute concentrations. I can't think there's another one. There's probably a whole bunch of reactions going on there, but that's for further research. I think there's no doubt the groundwater flow and pressure regimes can be monitored over winter with these systems. But one thing I didn't really talk that much about is I think there needs to be greater sensitivity. We need to recalibrate these to be able to see smaller pressure sensor changes, smaller temperature changes. There's my contact. And, oh, sorry, and thank you. And any questions? Did I stay within 10 minutes?